So what I'd like to do is we have currently some information here about attending the PASS Summit 2014. Now, it's the world's largest gathering of SQL Server and BI professionals. We have between 5,000 and 6,000 people, so that's fantastic, and hopefully we'll see you there. If you're interested, then we have a code. Get in touch with us and we can see about getting you a discount. And that's the information there, $1,895. So what I'd like to say is we are having a preview of some of the sessions, and that will be happening next week. We have 24 hours back-to-back webinars delivered by lots of great summit speakers. So we have people like Brent Ozar giving a session. So please do come along and join us. And the URL is 24hoursofpass.com. Now, here's a list of our virtual chapters. So the one we are now listening to is myself, Jennifer Stirrup, talking about counting is easy and measuring is hard. Insights using data visualization and how to get there. Now, I'm really glad to see that we have some international virtual chapter meetings as well. So we have Spanish, Portuguese, and we also have Chinese as well. So 9th of September we have a Chinese session. We also have Business Analytics coming up in September the 18th. Now, the Business Intelligence VC itself is actually having a Power BI theme. So that's the reason we're doing that, is there's quite a lot of good stuff happening in Power BI at the moment. And being business intelligence people, we thought we'd celebrate that by having a month of information about it. So we are having my session today, and on the 25th of September we have a session with Matthew Roche, and we also have another session by Kevin Goff towards the middle of the month, and we hope to see you then. So some upcoming SQL Saturdays: we have Dublin on the 20th of September, we have Paris on the 13th of September, and we have various ones in the US as well. We have a BI edition in Boston, which also sounds good. Now, if you're interested in becoming a PASS volunteer at all, please do get in touch. We have lots and lots of interesting activities that you might like to join in. So you might be interested in starting to speak, for example, or you might be interested in running your own virtual chapter. Now, these are all opportunities which mean that you become part of the PASS team. And that's something that has really changed my life. I've met so many great friends throughout the SQL Server community, and I really hope that you will all join in as well. So one last slide before we start to get stuck in. Sorry, where's my slides gone? Right, here we are. So I appear to have clicked on a link there that I didn't know I had. Alright, so the PASS Volunteer Awards. If you do know somebody who you think has been a great volunteer, then you can nominate them for an award, which we give out a certificate every month to the most outstanding volunteer, and every year we have the Passion Award winner. It's the highest accolade that PASS offer to the volunteers, and we basically give it to the person who has been the most deserving. And it's really hard because there's tons of really great volunteers who do a fantastic job. If you're not a PASS member, I'd encourage you to become one. We will send you information and keep in touch with you and help you with lots of SQL Server goodness as well. So the session today is Counting is Easy, is Measuring is Hard. My name is Jennifer Stirrup. I'm a SQL Server MVP. My focus is on SQL Server and on data visualization. I'm also on the board for PASS, and I hold the seat for EMEA. And my portfolio is the virtual chapters, so I love being part of the VCs, and Julie Coes-Marno is responsible for the BI VC, and we work together to try and produce great content for you guys, so thank you, Julie, if you're listening. Okay, so back to our topic. What can't be measured can't be managed. Actually, this was Peter Drucker's assessment, but it was actually a bit more subtle than that. What he was really talking about, if you read the next paragraph of his book, is that don't assume what's measured is what's important. So basically, people try to measure things that are important to them, or they should do. And what happens in the field of big data, for example, is that we have so much data that everybody is managing. Everybody is measuring something. But just because you have lots of data doesn't mean that you actually have the right data. So some things are measures that should not be measured. And I know certainly in my experience, I do see people who are trying to do KPIs, but unfortunately are just seem to be measuring any old thing, but they're not actually measuring how the business works. What they are doing is measuring the criteria that make the departments look as if it's running most effectively, but that's not always the case. So what do we need? Well, we actually need measurement. Excuse me. What that means is we need to think about what we're actually measuring, and that's actually quite hard because people don't always want to give you measurements which make them look bad. Yeah? And that's really natural. And that's what business intelligence, I think, that's why it's so difficult, because it's not just technical, it's about people as well. So we all know that we can measure certain things. But what we actually measure may not be the most important thing. So what we have here are some examples of what's known as Sabermetrics. And what that actually is, and you may have seen the film with Moneyball, it's obviously got Brad Pitt in it, Philip Seymour Hoffman, who was also a great actor. What they cottoned on to the idea is that statistics could be used in order to improve the game. And every year we have statistics being used to assess player performance. If you look at websites such as Cricinfo, it's all about data. And people trying to use that data in order to pick teams or perhaps validate how teams are performing. There are also lots of books which are focusing on statistics from the sports angle. So here we have scorecasting, the hidden influences behind sports are played and how games are won. And everything you know about soccer is wrong. Yeah. Soccer, that's football for us in Europe. So I think what is important here is, say for example you're watching a game of football or a game of baseball, something like that. Now the player can conduct a block. He can block the ball by simply throwing it into the crowd, or he can block the ball by throwing it to another player to keep the game going. Now effectively that would be one block. But actually the outcome of that block is actually very different in both cases. The second example, where the ball is thrown to another player to continue play, that is actually more important because it keeps the game going. But if you were counting blocks, you would just have the number 1 in there. You would have no indication of what actually the block was going to do and what happened next and what effects that had in the game. And when we look at things like KPIs, what we do have is that it's so easy just to simply measure a number without looking at what the consequences are. So when we look at dashboarding and data visualization, what we're trying to do is work out what the most important blocks are and how to identify them and distinguish them. And that's more difficult to do. Because basically when I look at dashboards, and I look at customer dashboards a lot, what I tend to see is that people nail reports together on a page. That's not what a dashboard is. A dashboard is a visual display of the most important information that is required to achieve one or more objectives. It's been consolidated on a single computer screen so it can be monitored and understood at a glance. Now that definition came from a gentleman by the name of Stephen Few, Stephen with a PH. His website is perceptualedge.com, and if you've never looked at Stephen Few's website, I really recommend you do. I have all of his books, and I just think he's such an amazing writer. He's writing about a very, very interesting topic, but the way he writes, you're learning material, but you don't feel that you're learning. You just feel very engaged, very interested, and for me that's a hallmark of a really high quality writer. So if you're interested, I would go off and have a look at his site. But what do dashboards actually want to do? What we want to do is we want to dispel myths in the organisation. We want to replace them with the truth. Now that is really tough. It's very difficult in some circumstances, particularly if somebody has been working at an organisation for a long time. They tend to rely on their gut instinct. And you might come across people who say things like, well, I've worked here for 15 years and I'm telling you that the data is wrong. What you have there is very difficult because in this world of big data and more volatile data sources, it's actually really difficult to break down the barriers of the message of the data. In some ways, the size of the data doesn't really matter. If people don't like what the data says, they will ignore it. And we had that example recently in the UK. We've had the scandal in Rotherham, and where it was found that there was some really horrific activities going on in Rotherham around children who were in care mainly. And these matters were being brought to attention by the police, but some of the police did not believe the data. They simply did not believe what the children were saying. And sometimes the truth is really difficult to accept, even though the data is correct. And that example in the Rotherham case is very, very sad, and it's just an example where data can be ignored. We see that in smaller scales and with less tragic consequences in businesses every day as well. People might say things like, I don't like that chart, and what they actually mean is, I don't like what that chart says. That means we start addressing problems in the organisation, and very often what we find is that a business intelligence project is actually a change management project in disguise. What people see is they see lots of reports being created, or they say the reports are wrong. And what they actually mean is the reports no longer reflect what's happening in our business. So when that happens, it looks like the reports are being changed, but they actually need to address real problems and real items, real issues in the organisation. Now, data visualisation is important because it energises people, and it's easier to get the truth through when people see it. So how don't we want our dashboards to look? So what we're going to do is a little experiment. I'm just going to end this show, and we are going to go to Bing. So bing.com, right? And we're just going to type in dashboards. Okay, and then what we'll do is we will go to images of dashboards as well. And we will just let that rock up. Okay? So what we see here is we see lots of images of dashboards, and they are very, very busy. Now when we go back to our definition of dashboards of fitting everything onto a page, sometimes you see that's taken to extremes. So we also find that when people tend to do dashboards, they sometimes do things like this. So this is a management information reporting dashboard for the NHS. We can see that a lot of data, a lot of ink has been taken up by these 4 criteria in the middle of the page, which are rather fetchingly done in brown and purple. In the right hand side here we've got some dashboards, some gauges. Now these are actually quite difficult to read. So average by practice, by GB practice, but that doesn't tell us very much. Average of what? Now what we have here in the left hand side looks a little bit better. It's quite a simple line chart, but they've had to make it transparent so that you can see the lines underneath it. This is when stacked line charts don't look so good. So we can see there's quite a lot of charts here. But it's hard to find any really good, simple, clear examples of where the dashboard looks. So let's look at this one, for example. This is an example of an IT service dashboard, but it's really bright and it's really difficult to see what we're supposed to look at here. There's basically so much noise here, it's hard to know where to start. So it's not very simple, it's not a very clear message, and everything is in red or green. Now, you'll know from your knowledge about colour blindness that having everything in red and green does not help people who are colourblind. So this is the sort of thing you actually want to steer away from. So when we look down, we can see there's lots and lots of examples. We see lots of red and green, for example. So all of these dashboards are perhaps not what we would want to do for our own dashboard. So how do we then go about trying to create our own dashboards? There's quite a lot here, and you can see that people really love their pie charts. Pie charts aren't always the best way to describe data, simply because they use up a lot of space, and people don't always read area and angles very well. So if you've read anything by a gentleman called Edward Tufte, what you'll find is people tend to, he says that the only thing worse than a pie chart is multiple pie charts, and we'll probably find a lot of them here. I can't resist looking at this one. So what we have here is really bright, and your eyes are drawn all over the place. So in that case, how do we then start to build our own dashboards? Let's go back to our presentation. Because the dashboard presentation isn't only just about what we put in the dashboard, it's about data visualization as well. And sometimes people feel if they have a dashboard that they're able to measure the organisation just simply because they've got a dashboard, and that's not always the case. Sometimes the dashboards can simply be ignored, and I think that's often what happens, and that's what the actual Dogbert's cartoon is actually saying. So I really like Dilbert. He says some pretty smart things, and I do think that that's quite true, just because I think personally I find it a bit frustrating to go through a big business intelligence project, and sometimes in BI projects you suck up the poison from in the organisation that you don't see happening in a purely technical upgrade. So recently I've been helping to run a SAN upgrade, and I've been helping to run some BI projects as well, and the BI projects should be much more simple, because you think, well, it's Excel, how hard can it be? But any BI project is about three things. It's about process, it's about people, and it's about technology, and the technology is only 1/3 of the project. The rest is all about people and about processes as well, and if those two items are not in place, you can buy the fanciest technology and you can have your servers gold plated if you want to, but if the people and the process are not in place, then your project has probably got a higher likelihood of overall failure. So how do you know when a BI project has failed? And really, I think the success criteria is the answer to this question. Are your users using it or not? And if you find you've got a data warehouse or reports which the business are not using, and they're lumping everything into Excel, then we can't really say the BI project was a success. Right, so how do you design a dashboard? You may have seen this before. This is called the golden rectangle. You might recognise this as a Fibonacci sequence. You come across the Fibonacci sequence quite a lot in nature. So the Fibonacci sequence, just to remind you, is where you add 1 and 3, so you add 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 5, 5 and 8, and a lot of things work like that in sequence. And for example, if you count the number of leaves on plants, they follow the Fibonacci sequence. And that's why a 4-leaved clover is supposed to be lucky, because they are so rare. And the reason that they are rare is because they break the Fibonacci sequence. Now, we find the Fibonacci sequence a lot in nature, and people use it a lot in design as well. And this is what's known as a golden rectangle. So what we have here on the left-hand side is this might have the value 8. On the right-hand side, what you might have is the value 5, which is the top right rectangle here. And basically what you do is you take your rectangle, you take your screen, and you divide it up into segments. So your largest segment is on the left-hand side here. Your second most important piece of information goes on the right-hand side here. Your third most important piece of information goes to the bottom right-hand here. So on and so forth. And you do it like a nice curl. This curl here represents your attention, more or less. What do you look at when you look at the screen? And the idea is that you place your charts, making up the dashboard, in this sequence here. Now, often I find that people find it really hard to know what goes where on a dashboard. And what I tend to do is I simply use Excel and I block it out like this. And then I will say to the people I'm working with, look, put everything inside these borders. And what is your most important piece of information? Okay, so let's put that in the middle here. And people will find it much more easy to see then. Because you follow the golden rectangle, you follow this design protocol, it's something that's quite easy for people to understand. And the reason for that is it's intuitive, and you can also use this as a very simple Excel template, so that you can, even if it helps, get a piece of paper, cut out your charts, print them out, cut them out, and place them on the paper and get people to help you design. Because BI isn't all about technology, a lot of it is design as well. We design a data warehouse, we design our data sources, we design our reports, we design our dashboards as well. So guidelines for good dashboards. Well, basically, I tend to chop dashboards up into 2 different types. So we have our exploratory dashboards. And what that really means is the dashboards where you want people to interact with the data. And then we also have our presentation dashboards. They tend to be quite static. So how do you know which charts to choose? So first of all, before I go to the next slide, what I'd like to do is give credit to a gentleman called Andrew Abella, and if you go and look up Andrew's stuff on the site, then I would definitely go and have a look. This is on my blog as well. I just wanted to credit him. So if you're looking at suggestions and you don't know which chart to use, then what you need to do is have a look at this chart by Andrew Abella, and what you can do is just have a think about your data. I see there's a few comments about my voice cutting in and out. I have got a bad cold today and I'm really sorry if my voice isn't very good. I hope that everyone can still manage to understand. But what I think what we can do is you can see this, and basically I don't need to add anything because I think this is just wonderful, and I think Andrew did a wonderful job of this. And what I'd like to do is the middle is your starting point. What would you like to show? So when you're thinking about what goes where in the dashboard, have a think about what the data should show. I will see if I can change my internet connection. I just don't want to cut everybody off. We'll keep going as quickly as we can. I'm sorry if the internet doesn't seem to be good. So if you think about what you'd like to show and what goes where, I'll give you an example. So if you want to look at the relationship and the variables, here we have on the left hand side 2 variables and we've got 3 variables. So your bubble chart, that could include your motion chart as well. If you've got 2 variables, then you could use a scatter chart. So also, I think if you want to compare, now if you look at Stephen Few's book, Stephen Few actually says comparison is the beating heart of analysis, and I think he's correct. And that's why there's so many different types of charts for comparison. Variable width, now table or tables with embedded charts. I've actually done these in reporting services, and maybe one day I'll do a session which will help you to see how to do that. There's a few nice tricks in SSRS. Bar charts and column charts. I personally prefer bar charts, and the reason for that is I think it's easier to read and compare from left to right than it is to compare up and down. I personally don't like circular area charts. They're a bit close to pie charts for me. I do like line charts as well. Now what we have here is what you might find is distribution as well. So we have a scatter chart for distribution, and we also have it for relationship as well. So there's no problem in using it for both, I think. I'm not sure about 3D area charts, which you can see down the bottom right hand side. I personally don't find them easy. I know that they have a lot of flash. I would use them with caution. The thing with data visualization is it's all about your audience. It's not all about what you think, it's about what your audience thinks. Now I don't like 3D, and I don't do it very often, and I do explain to people why it's harder for people to read. But again, data visualization is part art and part science, and that might help you just to see and have a think about whether to use it or not. And what I do is I think everyone should print this out and take it with you when you speak to business users, and you can explain to them why you're using certain graphs. As I said earlier, the why helps you to get better at the how, I think. We've got composition as well. We've got pie charts down here. Now not all of these are available in Power BI, but you can do some really clever things in Excel which might help you to do some of these charts, like the waterfall chart for example. Just going to move to the next slide. So how do we make our chosen chart look better? Here's just a few things that translate both to Excel and SSRS. Right, I'll see if I can change my internet connection. I'm just going to end the show. I hope I don't lose everybody. Alright, I hope you can still hear me. Please go into the chat session and let me know if you can still hear me. I've tried to change to a different channel in my internet connection, and I hope that's better. Yeah, thank you very much. You are a lovely audience, thank you. Excellent. Oh, lovely, thank you. Good, good. Thank you. I'll keep going, and I'm sorry about that. I think that if you don't mind, I know that some people missed some of the last slide, but I hope you will have some patience with me. I really think that this is key, and I just wanted to draw out some important points. I think what you should do is you should print this out and take it to your business users and use this as a way of explaining why you're using certain charts. I really think this helps me to decide what to do, because I think sometimes in Excel particularly, and SSRS, there's so many different ways of visualizing your data. I think people sometimes default back to pie charts, just simply because they don't know what else to use. But hopefully, if you look at your data, this will start to give you some ideas and maybe some things you hadn't thought of before, like the waterfall chart, for example. So this is on my blog, and I will send out the link later. I just want to give credit to Andrew Abella for that. So how do we make our chosen charts look better? So we've gone through our template, we've decided what we're going to use, and what we'll do is, so have a clear background. Now I know that Power BI actually gives you the facility to use themes, which is a nice thing to do. It also allows you to use background images. I don't tend to use them because I think they can be distracting. Another thing you can do is format grid lines to make them disappear or make them very light grey. That gives them a very nice finish, and I think it looks more professional to do that. I think the default Excel can look a bit heavy. Now the legends identify the series of the charts. I like legends, but if possible they should go inside the plot area. The reason for that is when people look at charts, they've actually done some eye tracking studies which show where people are looking at when they look at a chart, and the eyes tend to bounce back and forth first of all between the data points and the legend. So the eyes go data points, legend, because people try to understand the overall picture of what they actually see in the chart. Now, if the legend is quite far away from the data points, it means that the eyes have to travel that bit further. But if the legend is inside the plot, then it's just right next to the data points. The eyes don't have to bounce back and forth so much. The idea is when you make a data visualization, you're trying to increase in comprehension, and you want to get people through that phase of bouncing back and forth between the legend and the data points as quickly as possible. The next stage that they tend to do after that is they will look at the points between the data points. So they will look at the different bars in a bar chart. At that point they've understood what represents what in terms of the legends. So what I think you should do is if possible, you can try to have a think about where to put the legend. Now you can make chart templates. You can do it in SSRS. You can create a template RTL file, and it basically goes, if you look for your folder report project, it goes in there. Now you can create templates in Excel. Custom chart styles are stored in this file, Excel US RGAL. XLS, and you can go and play around with that, around creating templates in Excel. I see people use Excel a lot, but what I don't see is people creating custom charts very often in Excel. It's a good way to get yourself started, but be careful setting it as a default chart. For example, I've seen some words in the internet where people seem to say that if they set the scatter plot as a default chart, then you might have problems producing pivot charts. That might affect older versions of Excel, so just be careful when you do that. Okay, so what I wanted to do really is show you a very quick example of a dashboard in Power BI. Now, I'm not going to show you how to create the dashboard. I'm sure you're absolutely fed up of seeing Power BI dashboards being dragged and dropped, but I wanted to explain the why of the dashboard rather than the how. So I've used data from the World Bank. So I'm hoping you can still see this. Yep. So I've just switched basically to Excel 2013, and what we're showing here is a very, very simple dashboard in Excel. Now, at the moment, there's not many KPIs in Power BI. And that's a bit unfortunate, I think. I think eventually KPIs will come on board, but for the moment we don't have any. But what I did want to show you quite simply is that we've tried to follow here the methodology we saw earlier in terms of the golden rectangle. So if we look at our Fibonacci sequence, the sizing here is simply, this would be our 8, and then we've basically chosen a 3 and a 3 here, or a 5 and a 5. And it's very simple sizing, because when people put things in a dashboard, they don't always know where to put things. And the reason that we try to size it in this way is this data here would be considered as the most important data. So this is showing the average percentage of girls completing primary education by the country name. So what we can see is that in Nigeria, for example, the average percentage of girls completing primary education is coming up as 5%. I would need to check the data to see if that was correct. But here we have Belgium. The average percentage of girls completing primary education goes up to 71%. It's probably much. I think primary education, I think what they mean is education up until the age of 16, rather than primary school education, which is what we would call it in the UK. So here we have Thailand as well, 33% is the average here. And New Zealand, as you might expect, 99% there. So we can see that there might be a relationship, for example, between income level and the education of girls throughout the world. So here's the same data over time. I've put the legend in here. Now, unfortunately, the legends aren't very customizable in Power View, because ideally I would like to make the font a lot smaller and change it around a bit. It'd be nice to have it inside. If this was Excel, what I would do is I would not have the legend here. I would create a separate text box and put it closer inside, just so it looked better, because it's kind of squeezed off the end there. So what we see here is that the high income, and these two filter one another. So in high income countries, what we see here is that they're much more likely to complete primary education than low income countries. So what we have here for low income is we can see that over the years, the number of girls completing primary stage of education is starting to increase over the years, and that's great. So the average goes, for example, from 28% in the year 1973 through to about just over 60%. So that's a dramatic change in the last 40 or so years. Now, what we see here as well is that the child mortality rate per 1,000 live births also decreases as well over the past 40 years. And that's great. So here we go for 223 average mortality, and that goes down to just about 100. So and then if we stop filtering that, we can see that the data starts to come back. Now, one thing we do notice is that some of the data is missing for the high income countries here. So the thing with data visualization, it allows you to see problems in the data as well, and that's a great way of exposing problems in the data. And I think quickly visualizing data allows you to see outliers, it allows you to see incomplete data or missing data, so it's a great way to start. Data visualization isn't always the end point in a BI project, it can be the start as well as you profile your data. So another why is we use line charts here because it's continuous data which over time changes, and we go from left to right when we do these charts. I sometimes see people reversing the axes, so they have the highest year at the left hand side and the lowest year at the right. That doesn't work very well because people's expectations are that we go from the left to the right. We have an inbuilt heuristic in our perceptual system, and Stephen Few talks about this in his book, and he talks about heuristics which help us to understand the world better. An American psychologist called Gibson talked about ecological psychology, and that was all about what the world gives you and what it affords you and how you are designed to cope with your environment. And that's where some of these heuristics are posited to come from. So one heuristic we have in our heads is that items which slope to the right tend to increase. And that's why when we look at an axis, we start with the years on the left-hand side, going from the increasing in years to the right-hand side. And we do that very simply so that we meet that heuristic that we have in our visual systems. One thing that Power View does really nicely is it also aligns the axes as well. If you look at something like reporting services, you have to know some tips and tricks in aligning axes. The problem with that is if your axes are not aligned, they can look quite skewed. And that's important in a dashboard, because when you're designing a dashboard, you don't want to have lots of different skewed representations of the data. It's good to have everything as aligned as much as possible, so if you're using percentages, then you can stick to those, for example. Okay, so just to summarise, on the left-hand side here, we've tried to stick to our Fibonacci sequence, and on the right-hand side, we've started to break up this towards our design here. So if we go back to this slide here, what we can see here is our map. We simply go here in the middle, and then we've started to make the rest of the visualization a size 5 here, then a size 3. So I will continue. Somebody asked for the name of the gentleman who created the chart chooser. His name is Andrew Abella. So I've just put that up there in order to answer that question. Hopefully that will give you time to go off and quickly Bing search him. So I hope that will help a little bit. And here's the chart again. So Andrew designed this one. I recommend you go and have a look at that. And one thing I'd probably look at just before you go is here's the World Bank. This is where I got the data from. You can see they've done a chart here for the world map. And if you're interested, I recommend, and you just want to go around and play with some data, I recommend you look at the World Bank and use that when you're trying to have a play with some of the Power BI material out there. Alright, so I'm just going to have a quick look through to see if I've got any questions. Can you recommend me any standard colours for a dashboard? Now that's an awesome question, Nat, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to have a quick look on, I think in my blog, I've blogged about this before, but there's different types of palettes. We've got sequential palettes, we've got discrete palettes. I think Stephen Few talked about this, so I'm just going to search for, here it is, this is the one I was looking for. Now I will, if you're on Twitter, I'll make sure that I tweet this up for you later, but this is an amazing article, and I think he talks about different types of palettes and what they actually mean. I will see if he's got a bit here. Yeah, so what you can do is stick to the same intensity and the same hue. Now, colour is really important because if you take, for example, something like a Rubik's Cube, I assume everybody knows what a Rubik's Cube is. It's a child's toy, which I've never been able to solve. And basically, it's a cube which each side has a different colour on it. And you mix up the cube and then you try to work out what colours go with what sides. It's harder than it sounds. But the thing about the Rubik's Cube is that it very much plays on our sense of colour in order to solve and make the information really clear to us. So what we tend to have here is, now this one is that he's used different hues of the same colour in order to display the information. Here he's used completely different colours as well. And then it starts to become to the point where you can just simply use a colour to represent. So what Stephen Few says here, it's useful to maintain several standard palettes of ordered colours. Now, another good site you could look for is Colour Brewer. Oops, why hasn't that come up? Should do. Colour advice for maps. Now, what you do here is, if you find it quite difficult to work out the intensity, this will help you to do that. So you could pick on this hue, for example. You may not quite like these colours, but what you can do is maybe ever think about, you could use these 5 different colours here, and you can use data which is sequential, or where it's a sequence, which is this kind of colour here, where you use the same colour but just different intensities of it. The other thing you could do is use diverging palettes. And what we have here is where you use different colours to represent different things. And I know I talked about diverging palettes before, but I can't find the link. Here we are. Right, so it seems to say it's in this article here, so let's look for diverging. Yeah, here we are. So this is Colour Brewer here, and there's 3 different types. Categorical tend to be for things like maps, where you might want to show different colours for different items. Diverging is what a lot of dashboards try to do, and that's where they use red, yellow and green in order to represent excuse me, to represent profit and loss, or okay. But red and green don't work very well, so if you're looking for a good alternative, red and blue probably work better, and maybe you could use something like this. Qualitative, you can use these as well. I'm not so sure about these colours. You could use different colour schemes. I'm not sure if a lot of organisations would use red and purple together. Another thing you can use is HTML colour palettes. The colour wheel. So we'll try this one. So what this gives you is you can create different shades of the same colour, or if you use the colour wheel itself, just trying to find one. Let's try that one. What you can do is try to work out which colours to use that are balanced with each other. So that's a bit fierce, that red, so you might decide, well actually I want to tone that down a little bit. So how does that work? And what this starts to give you is just different. You can use the RGB codes and the hex codes and SSRS in order to get the colours right. These are just examples, so you might decide, well actually I want to use blue. Yeah. So there's lots actually you can do with colour, and that will give you something which may or may not balance. But if you're stuck for ideas, Colour Brewer is a great place to start, but I would definitely read this article by Stephen Few. It's a cracking article which just explains absolutely everything about it. And if I were you, that's probably a good place to leave it actually. I could just set that as a homework for people sometimes, to go off and read that. Now you're probably wondering, there are conferences which talk about colour theory. It's a very complex subject, and they tend to use grey and white for their backgrounds, so they don't use colour. So that's just maybe something to take away a little bit as well. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. And I think, all right, this gentleman Conan. Conan has kindly, I don't know if I can copy it, I'm going to try. Copy stream presentation design charts. I'm just going to see if I can possibly copy that. Streampresentation.com. Alright, so here's the website here where I've taken the design, charts. I'm sorry I had to type that in, I can't copy and paste from the chat window. So here we have the chart suggestions or thought starter here, and I'll make sure that I tweet that afterwards so that you've all got it. And we should shoot Andrew an email just to thank him. Thank you for your comments, Doris. Yes, I'll put up this recording. I probably should record it again once my voice is a bit better. I can't do anything about the Scottish accent, but Kevin has asked me which part of Scotland I'm from. I'm actually originally from a place called Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock is not really famous for anything other than 2 Nobel Prize winners used to attend my old school, which is Kilmarnock Academy, and it produces whiskey, and that's probably all everyone needs to know about Kilmarnock. Football, yes, and it's got a football team, yes. I'm not sure if they're very good. They've got squirrels on them as the logo, but that's where I'm from. But I just wanted to say thank you all very, very much for your patience with the internet issues. I managed to switch channels, and purely due to luck I was able to change that. What I'll do is I'll post up this recording as it is, and then when my voice is better I'll re-record it and I'll send out an email just to let you know when it's been re-recorded. I've been lucky to make it this far, and I'm sorry about my noise in my voice and the internet as well. But I just wanted to say thank you all very, very much. Data visualization is a passion of mine, and if you're interested, my blog is jenstirrup.com, and you can get in touch with me there if you have any other questions. But thank you very much, and with that I will leave it there. And I think, so wherever you are in the world, good morning, good evening and good night, and thank you for joining us. So this was presented in behalf of PASS, and our website is sequelpass.org, so please feel free to visit that or our YouTube channel in order to get a hold of any of our other recordings. Alright, thank you everyone. Bye.